So to answer your question, Kostas, of how is this being used and how do we see it being used, I can speak from the CADTH lens and a little bit on the regulator's lens, but CADTH has for many years accepted real world evidence, but in different aspects of our business. So if we're trying to understand currently in the community, how are in our ecosystem, how are patients using this medicine? And we look at something we call current utilization, which is real world evidence looking at how many patients are taking this drug, what is the frequency, what is the dose, and we can break it down by country, by city, et cetera, et cetera. And that really gives you a good snapshot of like, wow, this drug's really being used, maybe even inappropriately. I'll give you an example of Ozempic right now, which is very popular. And Ozempic was an anti-diabetic drug which had an added benefit of some weight loss. Well, people hear that weight loss and what do you think is going to happen? People are like, I need this drug, right? I don't want to go to the gym. I just want to eat Ozempic. And that's what happened. And is the utilization of Ozempic far surpassed what had been projected. And that is because patients that should not have been taking, the non-targeted patient, some of them don't even have diabetes. Actually, the majority don't have diabetes, are taking this drug. And so you can imagine manufacturers and payers are saying, wait a second, we expected 50,000 doses to be filled and we're at 1 million. Something's up, right? And that's real world evidence in action. Okay, so a great example of how as a HTA body and a regulator, it's being used. So we also want to understand disease burden and or current practice. How is a certain disease state currently being treated? And real world evidence is accepted there. Okay, so we're happy to use it there. Where historically we have not used it is we follow the hierarchy of evidence, meaning we start with the best data, which is a double-blind RCT, systematic review, properly run and controlled studies, which has been the gold standard for a very long time. And that is what industry submits, and that is what is requested, and that is what was used. So if you have the best, why would you want observational research? That's not controlled, and you can't control the patient population, and it's a mixed bag, and you can't equate the benefit or harms directly to a drug. There's too many confounding variables. I don't want that. For the parts where you look at comparative efficacy, I want the best. Over time, we've realized that RCT, double-blind RCTs, and clinical data is not all clinical trial data is not always the best data. We need more fit-for-purpose data. Sometimes there are questions that can only best be answered by real-world evidence. And so real-world evidence has now been pitched as not a replacement for RCTs or that type of data, but a supporting tool. We've now added another valuable tool in the toolbox. And so there's a greater willingness to say, okay, yeah, I'll look at that RCT data and I'll look at the great clinical trials, but I also want to look at this RWE because there's certain patient populations that were not included in the clinical trial, like pregnant women, elderly, children, and they're not going to be included in these clinical trials, but I have some real world evidence that might allow me to at least make an educated guess. It's not killing little kids. It's not killing our grandparents. Maybe maybe it can be used with some caveats and things of that nature. So those types of conversations are happening, and that is where real world evidence is now starting to become more prominent. Also, what is blown up is drugs for rare disease or things in the oncology space where there is, it's much harder to run a well-populated clinical trial because of the lower incidence. Maybe you only have 7, 10, 15 patients. It's really hard to do an RCT. It's also ethically not the greatest thing. I know you have cancer, but I'm going to give you these placebo Tic Tacs versus the actual treatment. You kind of can't go down that route. So when there's this high unmet need and this urgent need for this medicine, but there's high level of uncertainty, we're willing to accept real world evidence because you can't do a large clinical trial. And there's another opportunity where real world evidence is starting to be used in decision making. So I think looking forward, as we get better at coordinating our RWE generation efforts, and there's continued acceptance and greater examples of it being useful, it will be more and more integrated into the process of how the regulator and HTA bodies use it for decision making.